Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Ovidio G. Assonitis' film Tentacles, or Tentacoli in the original Italian title. So this film came out in 1977, and that is significant because there's a phenomenon of which you may be aware, in which a film is really, really successful. Then a bunch of other films come along and try to recreate that success, often unsuccessfully. And that's what Tentacles is. Tentacles is basically a sort of... It's an attempt to capitalize on the oceanic horror of Jaws. So there are elements of it that are quite similar to Jaws, but is not particularly good. And there's a number of reasons for that. Actually, despite having some really, really big name actors like John Huston, Shelley Winters, Bo Hopkins, Henry Fonda. I don't know why I said Henry Ford. So it's got these really, really big name actors, but the film is just not that solid. So one thing that's potentially sort of useful here is actually to think about this in comparison to Jaws, which can help us understand why Tentacles falls flat. So one of the issues, and this is not... So Jaws kind of has a similar problem, but it's not as apparent. Tentacles is really badly paced. There's long periods of time where we're just looking at ocean in a way that is not interesting, right? So Jaws, the first film, there's bits in the second, and fourth films, I would say, where we're getting the same kind of problem, where we're just looking at ocean for a long time and nothing is really occurring. The original Jaws largely manages to avoid that problem. Tentacles doesn't. So there's bits of it that are incredibly slow. There are bits where the scenes with actors drag. So one of the main characters in this film is Will Gleason, played by Bo Hopkins, who I generally like. Will is a marine biologist, like a apparently top-tier marine biologist. He's the Matt Hooper of this film in a way, and that's an instructive comparison. And I will talk more about that. So Gleason basically is a killer whales guy. He has these two killer whales that he has trained through the California Oceanographic Institute, or whatever it is. Summer and Winter. Those are the names of them, I think. Or, I think that's them. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. And there are these bits, like there's this moment that's supposed to be this very sort of moving moment of high tension toward the end of the film, and I will at some stage actually tell you what the film is about, where Gleason has brought these two killer whales out in this very sort of large transport tank. It basically sort of looks like a giant propane tank, right, for like a house or something. If you've got propane heating or something like that, one of those giant sort of pill-shaped tanks. And he's just sitting on top of this, dropping fish in for the killer whales to eat, and he's like talking to them. And part of what we're supposed to appreciate about Gleason's character is he's got this sort of deep personal relationship with these killer whales, and he believes they have a deep personal relationship with him as well. And so he just has this long, effectively monologue, soliloquy even, because the whales are not responding in any way that audiences are going to find meaningful. Where he's basically like, I love you two whales. You're like my best friends now that my wife has been killed by this giant octopus that's rampaging around. By the way, that's the premise of the movie. And I'm gonna ask you to help me kill this octopus because there's no one else I can turn to. But when I release you, if you all decide to leave, I will understand. It's fucking boring as shit. It's a long bit. And because the movie has not really done enough, in my view, to make the relationship between Gleason and these two killer whales interesting, or to make us care about it, or even to establish that it's really emotionally significant, we just don't give a shit. And it's such a long, slow scene that without us having a strong emotional investment in it, it really doesn't work. And you get a lot of that throughout the movie, where it's just like, all right, stuff is happening, but I don't care about it, and I want this to move on. I want this film to pick up the pace. So there's a lot of so that's the one of the general problems. That, again, the original Jaws film just doesn't have. It is much better paced for a variety of reasons. I'll now finally get to the basic plot of this movie. There's a giant octopus that begins attacking people on the coast of California somewhere. Why? Not entirely clear. But it does seem to be drawn to radio signals. So shortly after people use their radios, this giant octopus will attack them. Fine, cool, good enough. And they may, I don't remember, they may sort of posit different theories about why that. Oh, no, I do remember now, sorry. So the general sort of theory is that this octopus's environment has been disrupted by the drilling and laying of pipes by Trojan Corps, which is a sort of evil corporation, whatever it is, that's doing this construction project. And Henry Fonda plays the head of Trojan Corps, Mr. Whitehead. He's not really in the movie that much, right? So he's kind of the human antagonist who takes on a role that's, I think, meant to be somewhat similar to the mayor in Jaws, whose name escapes me. Right, but the guy who's like, No, there's not a problem. It's not a shark. Don't say the word shark. We need money. We need tourism dollars. That guy, right? Whitehead is kind of supposed to be in that position, but because the only real stuff that happens with him is that he talks on the phone to Ned Turner, a journalist played by John Huston, and he talks to his second in command. It's like, who gives a shit about him? He's not interesting. He doesn't really drive the plot forward. There's an element of sort of exposition to his character of like, okay, this is the guy whose company has created this situation, but they didn't intend to, and he's not really like, no, this is impossible, and I'm gonna put up stiff resistance to it. It's like, I'm gonna put up flaccid resistance to it until it becomes clear that this is a problem that my company is partially responsible for, and then I'm gonna just accept that it's our fault. So, like, you don't have that sort of mayor, whatever the fuck his name is, sort of resistance to it. Ned Turner again, journalist, becomes convinced fairly early on that there's something sinister going on. He's trying to sort of figure it out and gather information from different people, etc., etc. And he eventually calls in Will Gleason. Yeah. And I think that's the sort of core elements of the plot as far as like the octopus conflict goes. But one of the things that this film does that I think Jaws doesn't is it introduces a bunch of storylines. Right? So we get a bunch of characters who either will die or people around them will die or whatever it is, right? And we sort of follow them for a while. We don't have that in Jaws, right? Like, Kintner, the Kintner boy, for some reason, Adam Kintner is sticking in my head, but that doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't matter. The Kintners, other than the fact that they're on this beach, little Kintner gets eaten by the shark. Mom is displeased about that. We know fuck all about them. We don't give a shit about them as characters. We are not following them. We're not interested in them. We are interested in the three characters of Chief of Police Martin Brody, marine biologist Matt Hooper, and shark hunter Quint. That's the three characters that the film actually cares about. Everybody else exists to support them and to move the plot along. In Tentacles, that's not the situation, right? Like, we follow Tilly Turner, who's Ned Turner's sister, played by Shelley Winters. Like, we follow her for a long time, and she has her kid and her friend's kid, and like she's signed them up for this sailing race, and so what? Right? So the kids get attacked because she's bought them walkie-talkies, and so the octopus comes after them because they've got a radio. It kills one of those kids. It fucking ruins the regatta for everybody, etc., etc. Sure, okay. We don't need half an hour of Shelley Winters content. No offense to Shelley Winters. She's an excellent actress. But we don't need half an hour of that character just going around sort of being neurotic and kind of like overbearing with her kids. We don't need it, right? It doesn't really move the plot along. And it's not sufficient to get us emotionally invested enough that we're going to care any more about this kid dying than we otherwise would. So it ends up, again, being one of these things that really drags the pace of the movie down, because they're just trying to focus on too many characters and give too many characters their own plot line that we're supposed to be invested in, etc., etc. And that's not the only one. There's a number of others, but that's a good sort of example of it. And then the other thing I want to talk about this film that I think is substantially different from Jaws, and that makes Jaws much more successful, is Will Gleason. Gleason is supposed to be this sort of top-tier marine biologist, right? Cool. Okay, good enough. Those exist in California. I have no problem with that. In Jaws, Matt Hooper gathers some data, right? We don't spend a long time on it because scientific research is basically boring to watch, for the most part. But, right, we see him go out with Sheriff Brody. They've got, like, instruments on Matt Hooper's boat, like underwater cameras and fish finders and what all. And he, like, goes under and he's doing research, right, to figure out what's going on. Will Gleason doesn't really do that. He has a tendency in this film to just sort of proclaim things, which, if you know anything about science, and I know a tiny bit about science, that ain't how science works, right? That's bad scientific practice. So I'll give you a couple of examples of this. One is that Will Gleason proclaims at one point, shortly after arriving, that there's only one creature in the sea that could have killed these people in this way. That's big enough, etc. And that is a giant octopus. How did he come to that conclusion? Decided it. I mean, the reality is giant octopi are quite rare, right? They're not just swimming around every day murdering people. It's extremely unusual to actually encounter a giant octopus or a giant squid or anything like this. Any of those types of massive cephalopods, they don't show up that often. So for him to just be like, well, it must be a giant octopus, there's no other explanation, feels very, very cursory in a way that makes me doubt his judgment. And then later on, there is a scene where he and his assistant are on this oceanographic research boat preparing to release these killer whales to fight the giant squid, or the giant octopus, which, by the way, is actually how they defeat the giant octopus. The two killer whales end up killing it. Hashtag spoilers. Sorry. But like he and his assistant are just sat on this boat drinking liquor out of coffee mugs. We haven't seen them put any coffee in the coffee mug, so it may just be that they're drinking straight liquor by the coffee cup full, which, I mean, metal for them, but not great when you're doing science or trying to battle a giant octopus. But that's as maybe. And the assistant is like, I don't think this octopus is going to come back to its lair based on the way that octopi tend to behave. And Gleason's like, no, this octopus will come back. It's tasted blood and it thinks it's special. What? What the fuck, man? Like, that's not how you come to a conclusion about anything. You have no data to back that up. You're just like, my intuition tells me that this octopus will be back, and therefore that's the only plan we're going to develop, is a plan for when it returns. Like, fuck off, man. Gather some actual data, get a fish finder, do some Matt Hooper bullshit, whatever it is, and fucking come to a real conclusion based on some actual data. But no, it's just Will Gleason says this thing, so it must be true. And the film, because it's a film, can let it be true. But yeah, it's not scientific. It's not trustworthy. He's not a Matt Hooper, right? Even though, again, Hooper doesn't do nearly as much scientific data gathering as he should as a proper scientist. We accept that for the purposes of the film, he establishes that he is scientifically credible by doing some scientific research. And that's good enough.